Hello, I am Baal Kadmon and I'd like to thank you for watching and or listening to this video. This is installment 2 of my covering of Gurdjieff's principles, his ideas. I received great comments on the first installment, really great emails, tons of them actually, basically saying, it made his work more understandable, which I'm really happy to hear because that's what I try to do. I try to take complex ideas and try to distill them in a way that makes them more accessible. And by the way, I did get a few emails about asking for a broader program about it, and I'm still thinking about it because, I have other things on my plate, but if I do get more requests, I will definitely create something more substantial about Gurdjieff's work. So in this video, I'm going to discuss the Law of Three, the Law of Seven, and the Enneagram, as they relate, of course, to Gurdjieff. Now, the two cornerstone laws, the Law of Three and the Law of Seven, forms the foundation of his metaphysical system, providing both the practical framework, but also the theoretical framework for conscious evolution. Now let's discuss the Law of Three. At the heart of Gurdjieff's cosmology is this Law of Three, and it's a principle asserting that every phenomenon in existence, everything from the formation of the galaxies to human psychology, results from a precise interaction of three distinct forces. We have the active force, which is sort of a positive affirming force. And this is the initiating impulse that processes or pushes forward. Then we have the passive force, which is the denying or negative aspect. And this is the resistance or opposition that challenges the first force. And then we have the neutralizing force, which is essentially the reconciling force, the harmonizing force. And this is the mediating element that resolves the tension between the first two forces, allowing something new to emerge. So this structure, Gurdjieff taught, is fundamental to all creation and change. Nothing can come into being through a single force alone. It requires this dynamic interaction of all three forces to produce any new phenomenon. So let's consider this very simple example of, let's say, lighting a match, right? So we have the active force is the deliberate strike of the match against the surface. And then we have the passive force. This is the material resistance of the matchbook and the chemical compounds that allow for the fire to emanate. And then we have the neutralizing force that manifests as the transformation through heat that reconciles these opposing elements, resulting in a flame. Now, Gurdjieff identified these three patterns across multiple domains. In religious symbolism, we have the Holy Trinity, which is the Father is active, the Son is passive, and the Holy Spirit is the reconciler, the neutralizing force. In philosophy, we have the dialectics, right? So we have thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. In human interactions, where two contradictory perspectives might be reconciled by a third point of view. And in general, in the creative process, inspiration meeting resistance produces refined work. So this is this Law of Three has very profound implications, and that we often fail to recognize especially the third force in situations, because we tend to want to see things as sort of a binary, but we don't realize that there's a third force too that can help reconcile. And this is something that he said that we must be aware of. Now, he also speaks of the Law of Seven, or the Law of Octaves. Now, the Law of Three describes how forces interact, right, to create phenomena. The Law of Seven, however, explains how the process unfolds over time. So Gurdjieff borrowed from musical theory to illustrate this cosmic principle. And he used the structure of the musical octave as a metaphor for the development, the developmental sequence of the universe, in the universe. So, in musical theory, an octave comprises 7 major notes: do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, before reaching the next do at double the frequency, meaning that it goes faster. Now, crucially, these intervals between these notes are not uniform. There are 2 places where the semitone intervals are smaller. So, like, for example, between mi, fa, and si, do. Now, Gurdjieff transformed this observation, this musical observation, into these universal laws governing everything. So let's look at how this all works out. Now, the key principles of these 7 laws are as such: no process in nature or human endeavor proceeds in a straight, uniform line from beginning to end. And of course, we see this all the time in nature. 2, all processes follow a predictable pattern of acceleration and decelerations, and we see that also. Now, 3, at specific intervals corresponding to mi, fa, and si, do in the musical scale, the process naturally slows or deviates. 4, without conscious intervention at these critical junctures, what Gurdjieff called additional shocks, the process will either stall or veer off course. And then finally, the 5th principle is, with awareness and deliberate effort applied at precisely these intervals, one can maintain the intended direction. So let's try to break this down a little bit. I'm going to move away from the cosmic application for a moment, and I want to apply it to something a little bit more tangible. So let's consider a person attempting to transform a habit, right? So there's several steps to getting to that point. You're not just saying, okay, I'm going to change this. No, I mean, you thought about it, right? You went through stages in your mind. So let's look at what these stages will look like within the context of these musical octaves. So now this is attempting to transform a habit. So we, or they, whoever they are, they begin with enthusiasm and determination, and that represents do in the octave. Then there's progress through the initial stages, and that's re, mi. Then they reach a point where momentum naturally wanes, and that is the mi, fa interval. Without conscious intervention here, perhaps a new approach or a renewed commitment, the effort falters. Then, with proper shock applied, that means the radical change, the process continues, fa, sol, la, si. Now, once you're near completion, another critical interval appears, and that's si, do. And then a final conscious effort is required to fully integrate the change. So basically, he used the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, and then a chart starts again, do, right? It ends. So he used that as a way to measure each step. And I think it's very interesting. So he emphasized that this type of pattern is not theoretical, but is observable in all natural and human processes, from biological growth to psychological development, even from artistic creation to organizational changes for business or nonprofits, whatever. By understanding the law of 7, we gain this sort of predictive power over how a process will unfold, and then this way we can sort of strategically apply effort where it will be most effective. Now, the elegance of this is the elegance of Gurdjieff's teaching lies in how these 2 laws, the 3 and 7, operate not in isolation but in constant interplay, creating this intricate manifestation he called the ray of creation. Now, the next topic I want to discuss is the Enneagram symbol. Okay. And this is perhaps Gurdjieff's most visually striking teaching tool, right? The Enneagram. It's a 9-pointed geometric figure inscribed within a circle that synthesizes the law of 3 and 7 into a single dynamic symbol. Now, for Gurdjieff, this was not merely a diagram, but an emblem, a living emblem of a cosmic process, a perpetual motion machine that represents the fundamental patterns of reality. So the Enneagram consists of a circle that represents the wholeness and continuity, right? And then you have the 9 points, which are equidistantly placed around the circumference, numbered 1 through 9. Then there's an inner triangle that connects points 9, 3, and 6, which embodies the law of 3. And then there's this irregular hexagon connecting points in the sequence 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7, 1. And this embodies the law of 7. So the hexagonal pattern is significant, as the sequence 1, 4, 2, 8, 5, 7 corresponds to the decimal expansion of 1/7, or 0.142857, and so on and so forth, which Gurdjieff related to the mathematical structure of musical intervals in the octave. You see what I mean? I know it's complex, but that's what he thought. Now, I want to be clear here. Gurdjieff taught that the Enneagram is not static, but represents movement and transformation. He introduced it through quote-unquote sacred dances or movements where students physically embodied the pattern, walking the lines of the symbol while sort of executing precise gestures. Now, this sort of bodily involvement, or the kinesthetic approach, emphasized that the Enneagram must be experienced, not merely sort of intellectualized. Now, let's discuss how he used the Enneagram as an analytical tool for mapping and understanding any complete process. So let me think. Let's use the example of food preparation, right? So we're going to do points 1 through 9. Point 1 would be gathering the ingredients. Point 2 will be the initial preparation, sort of the washing and the cutting. Point 3 would be the first shock point, combining ingredients in proper proportions. Point 4 would be the beginning transformation, sort of applying the heat. Point 5 is the monitoring and adjusting. Point 6 would be the second shock point, adding final elements, seasoning and all of that. Point 7 would be the completion of cooking. And point 8 would be the presentation. And then finally, point 9 would be the integration, which would be the serving and the consumption of the food. So if we were to apply this to, let's say, personal transformation, points 1, 2, 4, 5, 7, and 8 are the stages of development, and points 3, 6, and 9 are the critical junctures where conscious intervention is required, what he called shock points. Because remember, between all of these numbers, there are these natural inert areas that need a little bit of shock. They're the plateau areas. So 3, 6, and 9 are those plateau areas that need to be shocked. Or rather, they are the shock points. Now, Gurdjieff claimed that the Enneagram was an ancient symbol whose origins were lost to time, right? When pressed about its source, he deliberately gave contradictory answers. This suggested that the validity lay not in historical authority, but in the demonstration of how it works. Now, I do want to mention, because I believe this is where some confusion will occur, it's essential to understand that Gurdjieff never used the Enneagram as a personality typology. The now popular Enneagram of personality that we see all over, you see it online, or take the Enneagram test and all of that, which is supposed to constitute 9 distinct character types with the different points on the symbol. that was developed much later, decades after Gurdjieff's death, by Oscar Ichazo and Claudio Naranjo in the 1960s and 70s. So while they drew inspiration from Gurdjieff's symbol, the personality system represents a big departure from his original teaching. So for Gurdjieff, the Enneagram was not about categorizing fixed types, but about mapping dynamic processes and transformations, so both on a cosmic and a personal level. So what makes Gurdjieff's teaching about all of this so distinctive is how these principles, these abstract principles, were consistently presented as practical tools for self-development rather than just these merely theoretical concepts. Because everything we covered in this video, we could just keep at a theoretical level. But he insisted that students not accept the ideas on faith and just sort of intellectualize them, but verify them through their own careful observations of the natural processes that they experience in their own life and their inner workings, right? So the law of 3 and 7 that is embodied in the Enneagram formed what might be called a kind of practical mysticism. And it's a practical mysticism, a system that bridges the esoteric knowledge with everyday application. And by understanding this, Gurdjieff taught that one could recognize the stages of any process and anticipate where additional effort would be needed, to identify the reconciling forces in that appear seemingly binary, but they are not. Apply precise efforts at very critical moments, the shock points, rather than sort of wasting energy at ineffective points. And then harmonizing opposing tendencies within oneself. And then finally, to participate consciously in a process that would otherwise unfold mechanically. Remember what we spoke about in the first video, where we are he said, man is a machine. This principle, by following these principles, we sort of demechanize ourselves. So it's very important. So this integration that he has here of all of these cosmic principles with this, the practical applications, was Gurdjieff's central aim. He wanted to integrate this. He wanted to help us, modern humans, to awaken from, the waking sleep that I discussed in the first video, to a state of more consciousness, to be more present, to be more intentional in how we live. So those laws and the Enneagram were not ends in themselves, but they were actually the vehicles for this transformation. They're tools, that's all they are. And they help us with our inner journey of self-knowledge and the outer journey of being effective in the world. So it's amazing to me. I love it. Gurdjieff really offered this not as just a philosophy, but a real spiritual practice, and comprehensive as well. So this is amazing. And by the way, people still use this, right? Spiritual seekers, consciousness researchers, they are influenced by these ideas. So that's it for this video, okay? Because I'm already at like about 20 minutes, but I hope it made his principles easier to understand. The law of 3 and the law of 7, and then finally the Enneagram and how he used the major octaves to comprise the different aspects of it. And I think this is probably one of the more difficult concepts of his, but I tried to make it as presentable as or accessible as I could. Now, again, if you want me to create a broader program about this, please let me know. Email me back if you receive this in an email, or you can email me at reshef@baalkadmon.com and let me know. Because if a set number of people say yes, they want this, then that's what I'll do. But I do have to finish, the Watchers and the Tibetan Book of the Dead, but I'll definitely get to this because there's a lot to it. So in the next video, which will be the final video on this, I'm going to discuss some more practical ways to implement what we just discussed, not only in this video, but in the first one as well. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this talk here. I will speak to you soon. So mote it be.